There's something happening in your life right now that nobody else can see, and maybe you've been trying to explain it to people who just don't understand. You've been feeling this pull, this quiet tug on your heart that doesn't come with loud instructions or dramatic signs, but it's there, persistent and gentle, like someone waiting patiently at a door you didn't even know existed. I want to talk to you today about what happens when Jesus begins to draw your soul inward, when he starts calling you away from the noise and into a place that feels both unfamiliar and strangely like home. This isn't about leaving the world or abandoning your responsibilities. It's about discovering that there's a deeper room inside you where God has been waiting all along. Maybe you've noticed that the things that used to satisfy you don't quite reach the same places anymore. The conversations feel hollow, the distractions feel temporary, and even your victories feel like they're missing something you can't name. That restlessness isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. It's actually a sign that something is finally going right. Jesus said in John chapter 6, verse 44, that no one can come to him unless the Father draws them. And that drawing isn't always a dramatic conversion moment. Sometimes it's a slow and steady invitation into intimacy. God is not trying to take things away from you out of cruelty. He's trying to show you that there's a banquet you've been invited to, and you've been filling up on scraps. When your soul is being drawn inward, you start to notice the difference between being busy and being present, between being surrounded by people and actually being known. You begin to realize that you've been performing for an audience that was never meant to define you, and the applause you were chasing was never going to heal the part of you that feels unseen. There's a verse in 1 Kings chapter 19 where God says he will lead his people into the wilderness and speak tenderly to them. And I know the wilderness doesn't sound appealing, but sometimes God removes the distractions so you can finally hear his voice. This inward drawing often comes with a stripping away, not because God is punishing you, but because he's peeling back the layers you've wrapped around yourself for protection. You've worn masks for so long that you forgot what your real face looks like, and now God is gently asking you to stop performing and start receiving. He's not interested in the version of you that's always strong, always certain, always put together. He wants the version of you that's tired, that's questioning, that's been carrying weight you were never meant to bear alone. When Jesus draws you inward, he's not pulling you into isolation, he's pulling you into intimacy. And there's a big difference. Isolation makes you feel forgotten, but intimacy makes you feel found. Isolation whispers that you're alone because you're not enough, but intimacy whispers that you're chosen because you're loved. I think a lot of us have been taught to measure our faith by how much we do, how many people we serve, how visible our devotion is to others. But Jesus spent entire nights alone in prayer, withdrawing from the crowds, stepping away from even his closest friends to be with the Father. If Jesus himself needed that inward time, that sacred solitude, why do we think we can sustain ourselves on constant output and external validation? In Luke chapter 5, verse 16, it says that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. And the word often tells us this wasn't a one-time thing. It was a rhythm, a pattern, a necessary part of his walk. You are being invited into that same rhythm, and it might mean saying no to things that other people think you should say yes to. It might mean disappointing people who are used to you being available for everyone except yourself. It might mean sitting in silence when you're used to filling every moment with noise. And that silence might feel uncomfortable at first because you're not used to being alone with your own thoughts. But in that silence, in that inward place, you'll start to hear a voice that's been drowned out by all the others. You'll hear the voice that knows your name, not the name people call you or the roles you play, but the name God gave you before you ever tried to earn anyone's approval. There's a story in 1 Kings chapter 19 where the prophet Elijah is running for his life, exhausted and afraid, and he hides in a cave waiting for God to show up. God sends a mighty wind, then an earthquake, then a fire, but the Bible says God wasn't in any of those dramatic displays. Instead, God came in a gentle whisper, a still, small voice that Elijah could only hear because he stopped looking for the spectacular and started listening for the subtle. Maybe you've been waiting for God to show up in the big moments, the breakthroughs, the undeniable miracles, and you've missed him in the quiet invitations he's been extending all along. The inward journey isn't about escaping reality. It's about encountering the realest thing there is, the presence of a God who doesn't need you to be impressive to be interested in you. He's drawing you inward because there are conversations he wants to have with you that can't happen in the middle of chaos. There are wounds he wants to heal that you've been too busy to acknowledge, let alone address. There are lies you've believed about yourself that he wants to replace with truth, but you have to be still enough to let him do the work. Psalm 46 verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." And we often skip over the first part to get to the second. We want to know God, but we don't want to be still, because being still feels unproductive. It feels like we're wasting time when we could be achieving something. But what if the stillness is the achievement? What if learning to rest in God's presence is the most productive thing you could possibly do? When Jesus draws your soul inward, he's teaching you that your worth isn't tied to your output. Your value isn't measured by how much you accomplish or how many people need you. He's teaching you that you are loved simply because you are, not because of what you bring to the table, but because he set the table for you in the first place. This is where real transformation happens, not on the stage, not in the spotlight, but in the secret place where only you and God exist. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, Jesus tells us to go into our room, close the door, and pray to our Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. The reward isn't always something you can show other people. Sometimes the reward is peace that doesn't make sense to anyone but you. Sometimes the reward is clarity that cuts through confusion, or strength that rises up from a place you didn't know existed inside you. Sometimes the reward is simply knowing that you're not alone, even when you feel invisible to everyone else. I know this inward drawing can feel lonely at first, especially if you're used to being surrounded by people or staying constantly busy. You might feel like you're being left behind while everyone else moves forward, like you're missing out on opportunities because you're spending time in this hidden place with God. But what if you're not being left behind? What if you're being led ahead, prepared for something that requires a deeper foundation than you currently have? Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7 that the wise man builds his house on the rock, and when the storms come, the house stands firm. But you can't build on the rock if you're always building on the run, if you're constructing your life based on other people's blueprints and borrowed convictions. The inward journey is where you find the rock, where you dig deep enough to hit solid ground, where you discover that God is not just a concept you agree with, but a presence you experience. And once you've experienced that presence, once you've sat in that room with the door closed and felt the weight of being fully known and fully loved, you can't go back to living on the surface. You won't be satisfied with shallow relationships or surface-level faith. You'll hunger for depth, for authenticity, for connections that reflect the kind of intimacy God has been teaching you. This doesn't mean you'll become some isolated hermit who rejects community. It means you'll finally understand what real community is supposed to look like. You'll stop performing and start participating. You'll stop pretending and start being honest. You'll stop trying to impress and start trying to connect. In John chapter 15, Jesus talks about abiding in him the way a branch abides in a vine. And abiding isn't an active striving, it's a settled resting. The branch doesn't produce fruit by trying harder, it produces fruit by staying connected to the source of life. When your soul is being drawn inward, God is teaching you how to abide, how to stay connected, how to draw your life from him instead of from the approval or validation of others. This is uncomfortable for those of us who've learned to find our identity in what we do rather than in whose we are. We've been taught that our value comes from productivity, from usefulness, from being needed, and the idea of just being still and letting God love us feels almost irresponsible. But what if the most responsible thing you could do right now is learn to receive before you try to give, to be filled before you try to pour out? You can't give what you don't have, and if you're running on empty, trying to serve others out of your own depletion, you're not helping anyone, you're just slowly burning out.
God is drawing you inward not to make you selfish, but to teach you the difference between self-care and self-obsession, between healthy boundaries and walls that keep everyone out. He wants to heal the parts of you that have been bleeding into every relationship and situation, the parts you've ignored because you thought taking care of yourself was somehow less spiritual than taking care of others. There's a reason Jesus went to the well alone in John chapter 4. There's a reason he sent the disciples away and stayed on the mountain by himself to be with the Father. He understood that some encounters with God require solitude, that some conversations can only happen when you're not distracted by the needs and opinions of everyone around you. When you're being drawn inward, you might feel misunderstood by people who are used to the old version of you, the version that was always available, always saying yes, always putting everyone else first. They might accuse you of changing, of becoming distant, of not being the person they thought you were.